Hi everyone, it's Morning Glory here, coming to you with another old world video, and today I am joined by the one, the only Val Heffelfinger from the Square-Based podcast, the man, the myth, the legend. Val, thank you so much for coming on the channel, man. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's so cool to be invited. Just wind me up. I'll chat to anybody. If I wasn't here, I'd just be hanging out at the bus stop, rambling about Games Workshop. So it's all good, man. I'm
Just as
happy
all the
to be
people
here.
move down the bench on the bus, like, who's this guy?
Yeah, in that scenario, you might be more concerned if they don't move away from you. You know, like that might be the bigger thing. Maybe you've been outmatched by someone else's anecdote. But
There's just some other weirdo on the bench. So
yeah,
for those of you that don't know, Val and his friend and co-host Rob run a podcast, run a channel called the Square-Based Podcast. In my humble opinion, I'm not just buttering Val up here. In my humble opinion, the best old world channel out there at the moment. Great mix of like humor, hot takes, and generally just good information. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And if my editor is doing his job, I always give my editor a hard time. He'll put a link down in the description below.
Editor, eh? Okay. We could use one of those. Our friggin' hour and a half to 2 hours. Yeah, we could use an editor. That's an interesting
idea. He's freelance. I'll send him over.
Right on, man.
So Val, the reason that we the reason I sort of reached out to you is because I've been enjoying your and Rob's content for a long time. I was there for the hilarious double awooga moment with the deep dive.
Nice.
And the more recent what was meant to be an awooga and ended up being a fart sound on the soundboard.
I have literally four buttons on my soundboard, and I still mess them up every time. So if you're wondering if
the
it's
reason
a bit,
they're programmed to different things, I heard the reason, man.
Hey, there. Look, if you think it's a bit, folks, it's completely organic. That is all accidental comedy, which I guess is why sometimes it's funny. But yes, yes.
Well, that sort of organic content is exactly what I want us to do today, man. Just have a bit of a chat about old world, because I really enjoy your content, and I sort of just got thinking, you know what, I'll reach out, let's see if you're up for something, and you were, which is awesome. Cool. And so basically the idea behind today is just for us to have a bit of a chat. There's no script or anything like that. There's no formal questions. Just have a bit of a chat about old world, and for you to just talk about what you think the game is like right now, favorite factions, what good, what bad, and just generally just chat bollocks about old world for an hour or so, and just have a good time.
I absolutely love it. The best part about doing the Square-Based show with Rob is, one, he's a great friend. I hope if that connection comes across genuinely, it should, because I absolutely love and adore Rob. And the other thing is that we just have like time blocked every week to just shoot the shit about old world. So finding a new friend to shoot the shit with old world, I'm in.
Nice. I'm in. So right now, why don't we just sort of start for 10? Why don't you just sort of chat a little about how you've been enjoying old world, what factions you've been playing, and generally, you know, what you feel like the state of the meta is, where you think it's still ongoing and developing, or if it's starting to cool down a little bit. Anything in that sort of direction.
I mean, that's a big bite, but yeah, I'll start with
only the hottest it takes, man. Only the hottest it takes.
out of the gates, like those people who may or may not be familiar with me, because I do believe Mordian Glory is still larger than Square-Based by a good margin. So I'm honored to be on this platform, sir. This is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for the invite. The thing is, going back, I guess Rob and I started doing I think it was called Old World Thursdays on Honest Wargamer streams about a year and a half ago. So it wasn't even spun out onto its own channel, and we had a really strong suspicion that Old World was somewhat imminent. And we actually had it dead to rights until there were some delays and it got pushed to January. Good Lord. Everyone, just so you know, everyone, like, so the people who actually got like review materials for Old World last year for the launch, which was January 6th, I think it was, they literally would have been getting their stuff like as they were trying to have Christmas dinner, you know, like they suddenly, like, it's like literally GW is like, okay, I'm gonna have to ask you to you stay your entire holiday and like cram all this stuff and be ready to launch. So good job, guys. But anyway,
hey, they don't care. That's the other people's inconvenience, not their problem. Yeah.
So that launch date was a little weird, but we were already at it for a year, just filling for time, and it was a really wild journey throughout that year, with the sort of things that they were teasing out. I guess it was in the spring we got to see like the first little hint of the rules. Immediately, like they talked about the fighting rank, and immediately we're like, well, seems like that means that having really, really wide formations would be encouraged by the rules. That seems, hopefully there's something that discourages that. Surely there will be something. No, not really.
I got so much shit. I took dwarves to a tournament, and every game I took 2 years of 24 Longbeards.
Yeah.
And the first 2 turns, all I did is redress ranks just out. And I had this one orc guy, and he said, I'm not angry at you, I'm angry at the game.
And that's the way it should be.
He just laminated himself into this line of 12 Longbeards.
Yeah. Like, so yeah, I think anyone who's upset about a mechanic, like, it's tough, right? Because you have one sector of Warhammer players, and this is 40K, this is fantasy and old world, who are basically vibes-based players, right? So like they will build their list based on what they think looks cool, what combos they think are cool, or whatever. And then they will also play the game in a vibes-based way. I think this guy would charge here. I think, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing is that you can play a game like that with basically any rule set. Like, you don't need a tight rule set to play that way. But if you're someone who enjoys playing to win, or enjoys the challenge of playing a game with some stakes, whether that's like, our personal record against one another. I'm currently like 0-4 against a local friend of mine, Christian, who's running Beastmen into me and just
Beastmen.
Maddeningly destroying me every time. I'm like losing my mind over here. Questioning everything.
Know that I am a whacker meta chasing piece of shit who has a proud owner of a Beastman army. When they first come out, I went, they look a bit shit. Now I've got them.
Do you know, like, Beastmen are like, so they were terrible. Well, they weren't terrible in 8th per se. They just had an incredibly old army book. They weren't updated, I think, after 7th, or maybe they were a late 6th edition book. Anyway, they essentially
Speaking to a Bretonian main man, I know the pain.
Yeah, so Bretonia and Beastmen Bretonia had the oldest, and Beastmen had at least the second oldest book, and it never did get revisited, which is ironic because they took them out of AOS now and put them back to the old world. So anyway, look, long story short, like that vibes-based approach is fine for anyone who's just playing the game. But the problem is if you play against someone with different vibes than you, that say is more game oriented or a little bit more focused on mechanics, or just likes to bring the stuff that's good, which is a totally reasonable thing to do in a game. Yeah. There's going to be a mismatch of expectations there. And I think right now, Old World, the way it's developed on the table, probably does generate that a bit, especially if you're going, if you're playing the game in a way that, you're trying to make efficient choices. You're trying to take stuff that has some power to it, because there's some real big power plays available to you in the game, especially if you're playing out of the box. The army composition rules, as they were released, are incredibly permissive, which is cool, because that means that you can bring, really thematic, awesome armies, because there's no rules restricting you. Yeah. But I think what we're seeing now with the Armies of Infamy is a better way to do it, in which case they give you a broader, like a tighter restriction. Here's a narrower pool of models over the Grand Army to choose from. And so you have a theme that's given to you, and then you can design within that theme. I think that's always going to be healthier for people playing the game. So getting back to like how I view all of this, I'd say like when the Old World dropped and we were starting to see things for the first time, I would say this that it has going for it. One, they did a lot of fan service in the sense that they went with a 6th edition. They did a 6th edition base, actually, and we called it 6th edition base, but also the Warhammer armies. Oh, what's the historical called? Do you remember what the historical game's called?
Ancient Battles.
Yeah, Warhammer Ancient Battles.
Which I only didn't know even existed until Old World came out.
I knew it existed. I didn't happen to know, though, that there was a 2nd edition of Warhammer Ancient Battles that was roughly contemporaneous with 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy. And if you go back and look at that book, that is actually really the genetics of Old World. It's that game. And that goes back to, like, so when people were confused about how drilled worked and things of that nature, those were mechanics literally cut and pasted from Warhammer Ancient Battles. And Ancient Battles itself was based on sort of an older style of the game. So that is all to say that, like, they used a base of the game that not my first favorite, because there's a lot of quality of life improvements. As much as 8th edition gets dragged through the mud, there's so many quality of life improvements in 8th edition that just make the game a little smoother to play. So I would say Old World, both a pro and a con of it, is that it's a bit clunky. And that's totally fine. It hasn't taken away from my enjoyment at all. It's just that it is indeed a bit clunky. It's a lot of bespoke rules rather than like core mechanics that are then modified from there. But the second thing that it had going for it, which I think is absolutely incredible, is the fact that they launched a complete game on day one.
Yes.
It's a little frustrating. Some people are like, what are you talking about? No, they didn't. Well, that's right, because you couldn't necessarily buy all of the things, right? You couldn't necessarily buy them all.
I had a 3D printer. I could get whatever the fuck I want.
even the rules, right? Like, if you didn't want to have to use a digital copy or, access one of the resources that almost immediately popped up for the rules, it's hard to get your access to, Armies of Infamy and Ravening Hordes and all that. But that being said, the fact of the matter is the Grand Armies are, like, we've seen the Index relaunch of a number of different games. I've lived through 2 complete, actually, if you count 3rd edition, when I was a stinky teen, I've actually seen 3 full reboots of 40K.
Yeah.
And although I'm not as versed in 10th, I don't know. I can't really speak to 10th. 8th edition was, in my mind, I compared to the 3rd edition transition, and I was like, wow, there's actually like a lot of depth to these rules. There's a lot of there's some meat here. There's a lot of units, all that kind of stuff. But with Old World, those army lists are actually very fleshed out because of the way they did core rules, because of universal special rules rather, and the way that they can just sort of combine them on a data slate. Even if a unit is bad, there's very few that don't feel, at least on paper, the way that they should. That they didn't miss a lot on that design. And fundamentally, I'd say that, with some, and I felt this way about 8th edition fantasy, there are just right now some, like, sort of overarching mechanics and things that you can do in the game that I think might make it a little bit, the power level of certain parts of the game are a little bit too high. And the thing that's really great about that, believe it or not, is that I think it can be patched, it can be tuned to make this game exactly what we wanted very easily. So I overall incredibly thrilled by what Old World is. As a huge fan of 8th edition fantasy. Tell me why you loved 8th edition so much in the comments.
Literally can't give you one reason. As someone who played, as someone who played Bretonians, who relies upon breaking enemies in the charge, and my 2 main opponents being lizard men and vampires, I did not have a good time in 8th edition.
But you see like the in Old World you have the classic GW double triple nerf, right? So like the sins of the previous edition are usually punished in the current one. And right now infantry, I would say, is tremendously punished. And there are a handful of factions, I'd say, that would reliably be bringing what in our mind's eye would be sort of a classical, like couple bricked up units of infantry, or even, elite infantry, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of and we saw it coming, but the on the table, for example, the poor Empire State Troop is really struggling to justify its existence. And I think that probably translates to just casual pickup games. It's probably hard, unless you get your opponent to just dial up something as vanilla as humanly possible. It's going to be very hard to run, that fantasy of a combined arms Empire army. Whereas in 8th edition, one of my favorite builds was a couple big fat bricks of halberdiers, a couple cannons, some like buffing magic. Like it was so much fun. So I look forward to those days in Old World.
So there's a few bits that you touched on there, man, and it's really interesting to see how a lot of what you have sort of experienced and you have observed pretty much lines up with what I've observed as well. And the reason that I think is quite significant and quite important is because, for those that don't know, Val, you're based in Canada, right? So
yes,
like
sir.
there's a big, two very distinct metas potentially.
Oh, yeah.
Two very distinct metas potentially. And to see like, and obviously you've also run the online tournament, the square-based online tournament using Warhol and all that amazing stuff. And that's almost like an international meta. So between us, we've sort of got three meta sort of perspectives, and what we're seeing is almost, it's universally being witnessed probably across the spectrum. So there's a few bits that you said that I really want to sort of pick up on and dive into. So the first one is this, like you said, there's like two kinds of player. You've got the players that want to play hardcore, and you've got the players that want to play like vibes. And that is so unbelievably true. And quite appropriately, going back to playing Old World, as someone who probably goes to, at this point, a 40k tour probably not quite once a week, but it's almost once a week. Like, I play too much 40k.
Nice.
It's not, but
hey man, I stopped playing 40k only because I couldn't say nice things anymore. I got frustrated. I couldn't say nice things anymore. I had to be like, look, there's people who love this shit. Why am I yucking people's yum here? Let's just
yeah.
You know, like if it's, you know, like I have my own personal reasons for not being into 40k anymore. I was as deep into it, and if there was ever a time in my life where I could have played, like I would sit in my life and be like, man, what would happen if like my life fell apart? I'd be like, I'd live in a van and just play Warhammer. Like that's kind of like what I would do.
That's living the dream, baby.
So like on the bright side,
going into the forest and making a log cabin, man. It's all about sitting in the basement and playing Warhammer. That's the real.
Right? My log cabin would need at least room for a 6x4. You know, like so, like no need to worry. Like I would be out playing as much as I could in 40k too. Derailed you there a little bit, but what were you about to say?
No, it's fine. And to be clear, I actually do really enjoy playing 40k. I just like to give it as much shit as everyone does. But it's interesting to see these two kinds of players develop. And going back and playing Old World for the first time, playing Old World competitively, because I didn't play Warhammer Fantasy competitively. I only played that sort of casually amongst friends. Yeah. But going back, playing Old World competitively, it's like stepping back in time a little bit and seeing like what the 40k sort of scene used to be like, where you had two very distinct kind of players. There's some advantages to that and some disadvantages to that. There's some advantages to it because when you go to a tournament and you've got a fluffy army, like I ran an army which had 100 Empire State Troops, which is awful. Yeah. And I ran spearmen with spears and shields, right? Like it was bad.
That's a heavy cross to bear for sure.
And the first game that I played was into a Skaven guy who had brought like blocks of like clan rats.
Here we go. All right.
And it was a great vibe, and it was really, really good. And I was proud because my state troops actually won a combat versus rat swarms. I was like, yeah, boys, drive them, men. But that was the only combat they won. But the next game I played is the same tournament. I played to a guy running vampire counts. And I was on leadership for the entire game. Yep. I ran off my entire army, ran off the board. End of his turn 2, and he went first. So it was bad. But what I found quite interesting is from that is when as someone who's been going to a lot of tournaments, I've been able to sort of develop that brain where when you just see the absolute wrecking ball that's coming towards you, you just let go. You're like, yeah, I can see it's coming. It's cool. Let's have a bit of fun game, had a laugh with my opponent. Yeah. And you do see quite a lot of that happening at Old World, but there's still, it's definitely, I don't think it's quite, the player base hasn't quite evolved yet to have that sort of competitive resiliency that I think 40k has had. Because in 40k now, if you go, that's bullshit, that's broken, that's overpowered, you're generally actually a bit of a minority now, and a lot of people sort of look not in a hard way, they sort of look down, you're like, and what? 40k is competitive. Whereas in Old World now, there's still quite a distinct group of people that I would say do get a little bit bent out of shape, but I think that what's probably going to happen is it's going to evolve over time as more tournaments just happen.
So there's a couple layers to what's actually going on there, and so the first one is a mismatch of expectations. So first of all, you knew what you were doing when you brought, what did you say, 80 state troops?
100. 2 blocks of 30 spearmen, block of 40 halberdiers. Boom, baby.
Like, so I definitely have to assume you knew what you were doing, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you knew you weren't like shooting for the moon on that one. That was what you wanted to play, and you were taking it into a place where people are going to be bringing stuff that's going to be a real uphill slog for you.
Yeah.
And maybe miracles happen, and maybe you get that like just amazing like underdog win against a much stronger list, or maybe you lose in turn 2. But you had the correct expectations, right?
Yes.
And the other thing is that like the thing about events, because I want to be very careful here, and my experience with events is, and also my experience in talking to people who run events, is that it's very important to realize that the bread and butter of people who are coming are still vibes players. They're still going.
100%.
They might know what's good, but they want to play their dudes. And the difference is that ideally, if they're not going in blind, they realize that like, hey, I'm probably not going to win this event. If I do something like blow out my first round opponent, I'm probably going to be eating a big old poopy sandwich in round 2, but I can still have a good time, right?
It's
like
the opposite of the submarine. You're gonna Zeppelin.
That's right. Yes, you're going to Hindenburg.
You're gonna Hindenburg. Yeah.
That is an excellent analogy. And the thing is that like I think with a lot, especially a lot of the online discourse, and I've said this for many years, Warhammer, I think, doesn't have necessarily by default people who know how to lose. And like they get very wrapped up in the fact that if I lose a game of Warhammer, it's your fault. You brought something that was too hard. It's your fault that I lost. Right? And so that's a mismatch of expectations. If you come in and you realize that you're at a list disadvantage, and this is the Stillmania thing, people are always repping the Stillman article. If you're not familiar with it, he was a writer for Games Workshop, and he basically wrote about how when he makes an army, he writes his 2,000 point list, he puts 3 layers of gloss varnish on it, and that's his army. He doesn't tweak it. He builds a case for it, and that's what he runs with. And he runs that into, like, if it's a game with more points than 2,000 points, he runs as an underdog. And he just sticks with that. But a big part that I think is missing in the Stillman thing is that like 2/3 of it are him talking about how he's gonna lose bad all the time. And he's
okay with it. Yeah.
And he's okay with it because those are his dudes, and he wants his dudes to go into like extreme situations and maybe pull out amazing moments and that kind of stuff. So the Stillman and the Stillmania idea that I think some old world players really cling to, that like the opposite of meta chasing, is done with the mindset of knowing that you're putting yourself at a disadvantage by doing that, and you're doing it because your vibe is like, these are my guys, this is my army, I roll with this, right?
Yeah.
So like I think that's where it is, and I think online a lot of people get really hung up on that. You know, if I lose, it's my opponent's fault, not mine. And there's 2 ways you can go from there. You can go to a situation where you seek out and find people to play with that are that see the game and how lists should look and are designed and like more to your aesthetic tastes. And that interpret rules. Like people gave Nova a real hard time, including us, about the way that they've designed their army composition rules and some of their errata. However, that's speaking to, I'm pretty sure, the group of players that TO anticipates wanting to come. In most cases, I would bet people with large collections, established players who, you know, maybe were a little turned off by how the 8th edition fantasy meta shaped up and wanted to try and shape it into a game that aesthetically matched their expectations. And fantastic. I've got absolutely nothing against that. I do love the idea, though, of having a unified rule set where everyone is playing by the same rules and can bring stuff that they like and not feel like they're going to get blown out. That's why I think continuing to iterate and evolve Old World's core rules will improve that. But the other way you can go, instead of, you know, saying I can't go to events, is to then say, okay, in my box of Empire, you know, like I can either continue bringing my bricks of state troopers and see how I can make that work better. Like, what can I do to make sure you're not leadership 4 against vampires? Or I can, or I can look at my Empire and I can try and design the best list possible out of the parts that I have. The problem is right now, if you are trying to build an optimized Empire list, it is a distant cousin of what I think anyone would their internal fantasy and Empire list would look like.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this because I know you've got some experience with this, and I know I've got a little bit of experience to this. So, for those of you that are not super au fait with the current Empire-specific meta, it's Gunline. And my friend Alex, I've done a few battle reports with, he nicknamed it Boomtown. It's like, Boomtown's gonna get you. And maybe he picked up somewhere, but that's what he introduced me to this concept, like Boomtown. And he called it Boomtown because I took what I would call, like, mine was Boom Village. It wasn't like a full town. Okay. I took one Hellblaster, 2 Great Cannons, 2 Engineers, and stuck it on a hill. Yeah. And I blew him off the table. And someone ran someone won a GT recently. I think it was covered on Square Based, and they won it. And they were going through the list of what it was, and then I was like, oh, yeah, some archers in there, some knights in there, and I literally just got on the stream, got to the bottom, went 3 cannons and Hellblaster, 3 engineers. So that won the tournament. Everything else is just what the guy felt like bringing, because that is what won the tournament.
I would strongly disagree. Okay. So the thing about the 2 Hellblasters and 3 cannons is Hellblasters are very good. They're very good. They have incredible output. The thing about Gunline previously. So let's put Gunline in context here. So a Gunline in an 8th edition fantasy context was tremendously oppressive because you had true line of sight. So there was, on most tables, even if you had force, even if you had a bunch of stuff to screen, all that kind of thing, it was a shooting gallery because it was just, you had line of sight to everything. Cannons were just laser beams that would just evaporate monsters. So like the meta was tilted towards, favorable conditions for shooting. And even there, like, you had a few armies that were predominantly shooting. There was other stuff that was still even better than that. But in this version of the game, because you have abstracted line of sight, so that those Hellblasters that aren't on a hill, for example, are going to have a real hard time seeing things.
Not on a hill. Every deployment zone is just hills. Right?
This is something, right?
Carry on, sorry.
I mean, it's part of it. Like, that's part of the game, how you set up your games. But the fact that you have abstracted line of sight, units can block line of sight. Units that even partially obstruct line of sight are going to significantly impact ballistic skill shooting. So Hellblasters have a tough time if they can't, even a little bit of a unit is covered up. Cannons have a tough time drawing lines of sight to places on the ground because you got to be able to see where they're shooting. So immediately, gun lines are not like the alpha predator that they once were.
No.
And because the game, because you can bring so much pressure with cavalry and the fact that cav especially can move real quick. The gun line, I played a little bit. I played both in real life and in the Square-based online tournament. Yeah. I played some Empire, and it was they were gunline variants in a sense. For me, it was super thrilling because you get 1 or 2 free rounds of free turns of shooting. If things don't go well for you in those turns, you're in real trouble.
I drew the analogy to The Last Samurai, where
100%.
Two scenarios will happen. It'll either be the first battle in The Last Samurai, and that's when it goes badly. Or it'll be the second battle of The Last Samurai, and that's when it goes well.
Right? But as far as a tabletop experience is concerned, that actually I have found to be really thrilling. Like, it's been it is a gambler's army, and by no means is it top end of the meta, but it's a lot more fun than everyone runs away turn 2. It's, can I do enough damage before they are really into me? And so when you look at that list that did well at Rob's tournament last weekend, if you check out Squarebase, there's a cool little event report. You can see the list.
Yeah.
Plug for you.
All the shameless plugs, man. All good.
Actually, I really want to encourage Rob to keep doing those. It was really, really fun. But you'll see that, like, in core, one of the big problems Empire has is its core selections, getting value out of that. You'll see that they bring a lot of archers because archers are just super useful. They can scout in Vanguard. They have moved through cover. and they can be used as units out in the middle of the table, causing problems for advancing, your opponent advancing. It also used core units of Empire Knights, which with drilled can be very useful little units to go out, be able to reach out, do some damage. They have a ceiling to how much they can actually chew on and deal with, but again, very useful. And he also had a nice big counterpunch, which I've never run, but he was running I think the Imperial Griffin with a dude on him that he was using to like make sure that there was some sort of a backfield defender there. And then I'm sure also the matchups are very dependent too about whether or not even that works. But what I just described is not an Empire army marching in formation, making use of detachment rules, doing cool stuff like that, having cool warrior priests, like casting spells. It's like none of the things that we love about like imagining an Empire army going to war are really represented currently in what could work on the table. I just think that, and I think it's not anyone who's like, this sucks. Like anyone who's an Empire player who like looks at what the option is for maybe an army that could perform at a higher level, if it like I could really see why they would be like, this isn't an Empire army. This is a bunch of archers, some knights, and some cannons and some help. Like it doesn't look right. And so that would be an example, I think, of a bit of a miss on the game designer side. And there's so many things that they can do that would immediately maybe change the way that looks and feels. And I look forward to what they do with what they've said would be in the fall, or somewhere around a year of the release of the game, a rebalance. So whether that's adjusting points or shifting around on core mechanics, I think 10.5 edition that we just saw in 40K is a really, really great example of managing a game in the wild, to try and bring it back to a place where it meets the expectations of the players. And Empire, I think, is truly an outlier in the sense that it does. When you're trying hard with it, it kind of loses its identity. And that's where I think that's what really turns off the Vibes player, because I'm telling you, Vibes players play in tournaments and events all the time. Yeah. All the time. Like that's the majority of players are there. If you look at the people who come out to Rob's events at the TSN, even the guys playing and in the online event, a lot of them were playing with armies that represented what they can play in real life, right? So like they were practicing and learning their own armies that they had models for. Yeah. So like even in the virtual version of it, you didn't see like everyone wasn't playing vampire counts. You know what I mean? Like people still played what they love, and fundamentally that's the thing. When you did
you guys have like 10 players playing Empire or something crazy? Like it was like almost the most popular faction or something mad.
It was well represented. I don't know if there were 10. I don't know if there were 10, but like we had, I think at the start we had 110 who like lined up to start. By the time like we had like a little exhibition round to like filter people out, I think we started with 100 players actually in the event, and I feel like 6 of them were Empire players. But there was a wild spread. Like we had really the only army not represented was Dark Elves, which was kind of fascinating. I don't know why that would be, because there's lots of passionate Dark Elves. I've been giving them shit, taking the piss, as you might say, of Dark Elves players quite a bit. But yeah, that was the only army that wasn't represented. And you'd think that if these are all just win at all costs players coming out because they're just playing the strongest stuff, well, you'd think that like no one would run Skaven. Like Skaven is going to be one hand behind your back at all times. That's so
interesting, isn't it? Like,
but we still had 3 Skaven players.
Everyone had access to basically the perfect collection.
Yes,
they could run whatever they want.
Whatever they want.
They still chose to bring vibe armies over whacker armies. That's so cool. I mean, obviously there will be those people that did take the most efficient possible thing, but 100%. The majority of the players there were bringing. I like state troops, so I'm going to bring state troops. I like great swords, I'm going to bring great swords. Yeah, like that's cool.
And that's the thing about in tournaments, and this is where again I'm talking about that fork in the road, is that like the player, and I always remember his Discord name. I always forget his real life name, but in Discord he's Morpheus, and he's the guy who did well.
Yeah, I've heard you mention him. Yeah.
And so I was chatting with him about Empire, because I love the idea of like Empire was. I have shelves like yours. Like I have a degenerate amount of hated armies. I have a world of choice that I can pick from, and I would always in 8th edition play Empire because I love my dudes. I love my dudes.
Yeah.
And so like I wasn't able to like I was just kind of despairing on it, and I saw him doing the gunline thing, and I thought, you know what, at minimum, that'll be fun to lose with.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely correct. Like I had a good time losing with it because it was a gambler's army. There was always a gambler's chance. There's a puncher's chance with it. And I think he's evolved it to a place where he's got a bit more than a puncher's chance. Hey, kitty. And so like he's able to like, you know, actually go 5-0 at an event. That's pretty cool. But that army, so like, and the skills he's developed, he's probably played in 4 or 5 events with Empire at this point. He's been the bridesmaid a number of times. That army's been iterated and practiced, and I'll tell you, it's not just point and click. Point and click, you lose, no doubt about it. Well, you at least lose more than 0 games.
That's pretty
right?
much. I think that's the thing with Old World in general, and it sort of leads us on to, and I don't know if you've encountered this because, like you said, you used to play 40k. I don't know if you still sort of keep in touch with those people or with new people coming into Old World, but I have found I have probably about a dozen people at this point who were 40k players who initially said, I have 0 interest in playing Old World.
Okay.
And then someone convinced them, like, come on, just come down. We'll play an intro game. Yeah. First hit's free. And every single one. Now, there's a few people that haven't tried it yet, but every single one of those players out of this dozen people that I know that have gone through this process, when they've tried Old World, they've gone, it's like that scene in Toy Story where he drops Woody. I don't want to play with you anymore. They let go of 40k, and they've been maining Old World, and the reason they've been sort of maining Old World is because they're like, it's new, it's fresh, it's exciting, it's like the honeymoon phase, you know, it's great, but B, this stuff covers everything I want. If I want to run a vibe army, I can run a vibe army. And if I want to run the most broken stuff possible, I can do that as well. And I can just wake up on the day and I can do that. And I will find people that want to engage in that. But it's just so interesting how, you know, it's funny because you said like it's quite clunky. All the 40k players who have come over to Old have gone, it's such a robust rule set. It just plays. Which is funny because it probably feels clunky to someone who's like mains fancy, but to 40k players are like, oh, all of this just works. 16 times the detail. You know, all of this just works. So
what I would say is that's often what that is that the game does just play when you don't know what you don't know. Right? Yeah. Like if you're just like making it work, it works.
Yeah.
Like it works. Where it breaks down is when you stop and say, does it work?
Yeah.
And then you go in and look at the details. Let's say you're playing with some stakes, like in a tournament or something like that.
Yeah.
And you know, like the details are where it starts to gets clunky. How to resolve, especially combats, especially combats with multiple units involved. And that's actually even 8th edition fantasy. That was a clunky thing to resolve. But that's okay because if you're playing with your friend and like you've got enough of a grip on it that it's playing as though it feels like a fair fight. It feels like it's representing the way you think things should go. Great, good. Yeah. What police officer is standing over your shoulder saying you're not playing that right?
Yeah.
The issue I think does come up sometimes when you know you have people who are doing what they can to play the game as close to the rules as possible, and they do creak and groan under that condition. Yeah. So I have said that the more you play Old World as a rule set, the worse it gets. In the sense that like you start to discover just like in places where there aren't resolvable things, and we're not as a 40k player. It's been many years since there were unresolvable situations or things that couldn't be answered very easily by how a rule interacts. So it's a little old school in that sense. And I would also admit that I didn't realize how much I missed, like having to be a rules lawyer, having to like study, like, okay, let's look at this clause and like how does this interact with this, and like, well, what do you think that they were trying to do here?
Yeah,
it's been a long time since like that part of my brain was exercised, and generally what I've seen is that there is a great because I was a little worried about the fact that like again, you're gonna have a lot of people coming to back to the tabletop that maybe have been doing other things for a number of years. I don't know when you started playing competitive 40k, but the
7th edition, 6, end of 5th, 6th, 7th, 40k.
So I would say that the best players when I started playing at the exact same period of time, which would have been 7th edition for me, were bullies. The absolute best players were bullies. They were people. They were people who could make their case more strongly and push over their opponents.
They'd browbeat people.
They would what's called angle shooting. They would test your knowledge, see what you know and don't know, and find their advantages there. They were pretty shitty.
Yeah.
But what happened was that the skill cap rose significantly in 40k. So what wound up happening is that earlier and earlier in events, that bully would meet someone who'd be like, no, actually, that doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
No, I know that it doesn't work that way. And they would be able to stand up to those bullies. And those bullies started losing, and they eventually started dropping out of the scene. The type of like nefarious player who's still very. By the way, the bullies were rare. They just happened to win a lot. So like if you were just playing in events, you didn't ever see them because they were above your head somewhere. Yeah. But like the modern nefarious players actually are more finding like physical ways to cheat rather than the emotional ways.
So I gotta tell you something, man. The worst case I've heard of in 40k, and this, it's not the infamous poo dice. If you've not heard of the poo dice, I'll tell you about that.
It's an incredible story. I love
the Element game's poo dice. Yeah, every time I go into Element, I make sure I do a little prayer in front of the shrine. Yeah. But but the worst one I heard of was a towel player turned up to a tournament with printed out and laminated data sheets which he had edited the values on. So when someone said, oh, I don't think, are you sure that's got movement 10? He was like, yeah. And showed them the data sheet. And he got caught out because someone went on the app and went, why does the GD Rap say it's got like an 8-inch move? Why does the GD Rap say that? Yeah, absolutely, like galaxy brain idea, like in an age of digital rules and anyone can check anything for free. This galaxy brain kid was just like printed out data sheets.
There were there's other examples of stuff like that where it wasn't quite that way. It would be a sort of thing where like the German translation of an errata was slightly different. And so they would bring the German errata and be like, this was my rules. So like that kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
Just doesn't hold water when you have a field of experts, and that's what winds up happening. That's what wound up happening in 40k. Is that the field? Like you can tell this because I stopped winning RTTs. I used to be able to go and win an RTT.
Wait, what are you saying about yourself there? About you outed yourself? Well, let me check your data sheets.
Well, no, it's more just that like I had a list advantage and I understood mechanically how the game worked, and a lot of people didn't have those things. As soon as people mechanically got up to snuff and understood how to play understood mission play at a more advanced level, understood list building at a more advanced level, my edges were gone. Like I couldn't just go roll dice and win. Suddenly I was the best I might be a 4-2 player. Like I would as soon as I got 3-0, I'd play that 4-0 game and I would get rocked because I'd play a person who like had the skills that I didn't have because I just have, for either my own ability or the time I invested, other reasons than, what his list had versus my list. I brought good lists, right? Like our equipment was the same. The difference was the skill of the player.
Yeah.
And so what I've loved so far in Old World, and I don't want to speak for everyone. There's going to be bad play experiences out there. I'm not going to gaslight anybody and say there aren't assholes who play Warhammer. There's assholes who do everything in life. We have to learn how to live with them. But my point is that I've seen such a great collegial spirit in the people who are embracing Old World. And especially when I watch people playing online, and we'd have these, these games in Discord rooms because we wanted to make sure that they, for the most part, played publicly, so that way, there was always someone around.
Yeah.
And there was just such a great conversation about trying to get it right. Like even like some of the FAQ questions I was getting and people pushing rules and stuff, they annoyed me. Because they were so pedantic, I was immediately annoyed. But at the same time, I had to like take a step back and be like, okay, I'm emotionally reacting to this. Do they have a point? If they do, then the TO needs to make a ruling, and that's fine. And then once the ruling's made, once they know what's up, they're not going to then like go and present their argument at the table because the ruling's been made. So like, and that's what's really impressed me about Old World so far. And in the circles that I've been able to see and play it is just the spirit of trying to understand this game, play it as well as we can. Don't list like the like we're trying to eradicate this idea of list shaming. You know, like just enthusiasm to be able to play this game again, because fantasy was so close to a lot of people's hearts. And I think it's super cool that, you know, it's converting people to it as well.
Yeah, it is in a big way in a big way. Like a couple of just sort of one last thing I sort of mentioned at that point. It's like we've had a lot of players come over, but it's actually like my local game store that runs a lot of tournaments. The TO/store manager originally said, I said, "Oh, are you interested in Old? Are you even going to stock it?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to stock Old World. Like, it's going to be like a niche game. Like, we don't stock Necromunda. We're not going to stock Old World kind of thing."
And these are also guys who also probably just finished selling off their leftover stock from Warhammer Fantasy. Like, I understand shop owners who are reluctant because they remember what it was like. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, and so it's this sort of it's kind of funny. Like, I give him a bit of shit for this week. Like yesterday, I was at one of his tournaments, and it was like it started off like, we're not going to stock it, and it's like, okay, we're going to stock it because people have asked us to stock it. It's like, but we're not going to run any events. Okay, we're going to run events for it.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I'm not going to play it. I'm just going to like, I'll know the rules so I can tier it as best I can, but I'm not going to play it. Okay, I've got a 4,000 point dwarf collection.
Right? Yeah.
And he now said,
okay, I went to my mom and dad's house. I went to my mom and dad's house. I went into the attic. I got my dwarves back.
Yeah, he found them in the mounted hold of the attic shoebox. And,
that's right.
And he said it's mad. Like, he's like, I'm addicted to it. Like, I haven't played. He said, I've literally just completely gone off like AOS. I haven't played 40k. I now play as a store owner. I now play 2 to 3 games of Old World a week.
That's wild.
I can't get enough of it. And this is someone who was extremely resistant.
Sure.
And reticent to it.
There's also the thing. There's also another thing, which is that Games Workshop broke our hearts. Like they dramatically killed like fantasy. Like they and then they not only like there's the end of a movie sometimes, like a hero will die, but like there's like clear tropes that like, oh, maybe he can come back. They made sure there was no doubt that fantasy was dead. They stepped on it, they danced on it, they poured gasoline, they lit it on fire. The end times just absolutely, like, literally exploded it. It's done and dusted. Don't ever dream of seeing this again.
It's gone. So, like, it's dead. It's not coming back. No matter how much you ask, it's not coming back.
It's not coming back. And so, like, I could definitely see why people would be reluctant to engage with a game that has that in its history. But also there are things about it that scratch. And I think it's one of those things where the core games, the AOS and 40k, have evolved to a place where they're very mechanically sound. And I think, and I don't know where it necessarily comes from, but like Games Workshop has this obsession with simplicity. Like, our games aren't simple enough. Like, simple but not stupid. I can't remember what they're
simplified, not simple, which has turned out to be the most bullshit statement ever released by Games Workshop. But
this is one of the core elements of playing war games, certainly Warhammer games, is that, like, it is an absurd amount of effort to get even the most basic game on the table, right? Like, the learning curves here to play a game are vertical. The learning curve to put a model together, if you've never done it before, is vertical. You know, like, everything about it is hard, right? So, like, once you're at the place,
when I 3D print my models, they come out vertical.
Right? But, okay, let's just talk about 3D printing, right? Like, I used to joke that, like, there were all these casual 40k players that I was constantly battling with back in the day, and like, my joke was always, look, if you're doing something where you seriously contemplate or follow through on the thought, maybe I should buy an airbrush, you're not casual. Like, if you have to learn a piece of, like, arcane equipment to, like, be able to do the thing you want to do, if you have to learn all these skill sets, you're not casual as a person engaging in a hobby. You're not just, like, you know, it's just, that's not how it is. Like, you are actually invested. You're casual about maybe different things in the hobby. Maybe you're more casual about how the game plays, but you're definitely not casual about Warhammer. There's nothing casual about doing this. Like, this is a lifestyle, which is really funny.
It's not a hobby, it's a lifestyle.
It is straight up lifestyle. And for the people who get the bug, it really is like that. I describe it like golf was very similar for me in my life for a period of time. It was I would think about it all the time. I'd want to practice. I'd like be really obsessed over different clubs and balls and like playing different courses and trying to get better and like all this stuff, having the right outfit, all that shit. Same thing happens in Warhammer. It is like a full, like you're a Warhammer player is the same as being like someone who has a hobby that they strongly identify with as like a core part of their personality. And yeah, so there's just like, I don't know, nothing casual about it. And the reason why I was talking about that was Games Workshop, for whatever reason, got obsessed with this idea of simplicity in its rules. And I think they jumped it a little too far.
Yeah.
In the sense that actually that's not quite it. And what really kept happening, I think there's another like chestnut in rules in like GW criticism, which is rules bloat. And I think that is closer to the reality. It's not the fact that the game itself is complicated and that there are options and that you can choose to equip a character in Old World with 100 points of stuff and you've got a list of 40 different things you can pull from. That's sick. That's so much fun.
Yeah.
The thing that was happening in, say, something like 9th edition is that you had, core rules, and then you had faction rules, and then you had sub-faction rules, and then you had mission rules, and all of those layers were also constantly being tweaked and changed.
Yeah.
And that's where the complexity came from. It wasn't the game design itself. It was just that, like, because of the way they release rules as a means to generate interest, change the meta, drive purchasing decisions, that leads to a game that once you get to the end of it is very difficult to wrap your brain around and can be frustrating to try and participate in if you just don't have like the ability to commit full time. So something like Old World, which is more stable but way more complex, that plays, that works because you can digest the rules and understand them when you come back a month later after painting up a bunch of stuff. It's the same game.
Yeah.
Awesome. Like,
I think that you've really hit the nail on the head there. I think what's what I have noticed with Old World is that it has started off as a big chunky rulebook, and people have had the time, and they've almost covered all. They've tried to cover 99% of the scenarios. Like I said, every so often, and 99% of people will be muddling through the game, and they'll never even bump into these edge cases where like there's just not a rule for this. But they've started off at this with this big chunky rulebook. And people have just been getting better and better and better at using that big chunky rule. But they started off with the complication, and then, but with 40k, they start off with this pamphlet, and then by the time they're done, it's actually bigger.
Yeah.
And it's quite a funny thing that was pointed out to me recently with 40k is that the core rules. Someone went through and did like a word count of like the core rules, and it's like 150,000 words for the core rules of 10th edition, and someone went to the rules commentary, which is meant to be, I'm not sure how this rule works, but it works like this. By the time it's now ballooned into a document, which is like 140,000 words.
Sure. Yeah.
So the rules commentary, I think it might even be more. This was like a month. This was like 2 months ago before the last two. They've done 2 updates since then. Yeah. This is like a month ago. So the point, like, and this is where I think that the problem with 40k comes in, and what I love about Old World is that because it starts off complicated, as time goes on, it gets simpler because people know how the rules work. Whereas 40k is often seen as this bloated mess because it starts off simple, but then there's like 1,000 different layers. But a lot of players might only know about 800 of the different layers, and so they're playing the game just out of date or wrong, essentially. Now, one thing I would say, we've talked a little bit about mechanics there, we've talked a little bit about rules, we've talked a little bit about balance and meta. One thing that I would say is incredibly refreshing. So my sort of last statement, because obviously we're conscious of time, my sort of last statement is the big difference that I've noticed between 40k and Old World, and you can't help but compare these two games. So this is predominantly an Old World video, but you can't help but compare these two games. Yeah. 40k, there's sometimes so many rerolls and so many layers involved that things are almost too reliable. And what is so good about Old World is like, I just fucked it. I can't come back. I went in there. I should have hit you on like 2s, and I just rolled like 7 1s, and I can't re-roll that. There's no safety blanket. And the example I want to give you, and then I'll hand over to you, is the guy that completely filled me in and made my entire Empire army run off and reconstructed my asshole in game 2. Went on to game number 3, and he came and lost the game basically like turn 2 because. He marched up his Blood Knights, turn 2 went for the charge, failed the charge, and the Bretonnian player on the other side of the board just went, my turn, and just went into him and just went, and he went, yeah, my game was over in an hour. And he went, that's just the way it goes sometimes. There's no rerolls. You rolled your charges, you didn't get it. Tough titties. That's it.
So, I refer that to some Warhammer shit going down.
Yeah,
so like,
that was
Warhammer shit. And like the thing that's awesome in Old World is, again, you're not rolling buckets of dice. So that's like first of all, like I used to play 40k orcs. There were times like in 8th edition, I would literally be picking up 130 dice to roll attacks.
Yeah.
130. Why?
I roll 130 dice in a game. Let alone in Old World, let alone in a unit.
In Old World, you deploy your army, you basically sit down in a chair and you have 10, 20 dice in front of you. You're good. You're good. Yeah. So like that in its own is great. But like something like Blood Bowl would be a good example of this, where Blood Bowl is really hard on me emotionally because because of the fact on a D6 on a D6 system, the least likely thing that can happen still happens 20% of the time.
Yeah.
Right. So like in a D6 system, the least likely thing that can happen happens 20% of the time. So like that means that unlikely things happen all of the time. Right. Yeah. So in fantasy in Old World, you get that, and you get these like critical mishaps. Like for example, in my horrible run against the Beastmen recently, I have miscast in my first turn 3 games in a row and rolled an 8, which means that like after like I casted 2 things, I was unable to shoot any of my magic missiles, which are pretty important. Yeah. That kind of Warhammer shit just happens. You can also go games in a row without ever miscasting.
Yeah.
And you just start living that life, taking it for granted, right? So like there's just more things that can happen in a game of fantasy that aren't predetermined. And I think that is 2 things: rolling less dice, and 2, having more core rules that mechanically let more things happen. More things just can happen on the table. And I think, and reinforcing that, I think we can all imagine, like you used the brilliant example of Last Samurai, describing like what it's like playing an Empire gunline. Perfect. But we can all relate to that visceral like charge, those visceral charges in Braveheart or whatever.
Yeah.
And like a game of fantasy, if you're miniature pilled, if you have like the ability to look at a table of miniatures and be like, that is the coolest shit ever. Like then like fantasy is very miniature focused. Like in 40K, especially as you know, as I was getting towards the end, it was getting very terrain focused. The game didn't play. It was
also now.
40K didn't evolve to a place where it could really be dependable. Like there's a very big divide between the oceans over basically how tables were. Like things were working in the European meta that just weren't working in the North America. Largely because tables happen to be a little more open on the European side of things than they were on the North American side of things. We started playing with denser tables, I think, a little earlier. This isn't 100% the case, but as a general statement, I think it did play. Eventually, like things like the ETC, which became the WTC, started intensifying the density of terrain, and you made for a much more interesting game of that became what 40K became. But from a person looking at the table, most of the time what you're seeing are a bunch of MDF ruins. And you don't see all of the cool ass models, and you can't see how they're about to engage with one another. When you look at a table of Old World, it reads like these guys are about to F each other up. Like, holy shit, there's a dragon over there, and there's just some dudes over here. That's going to be messy. Like, you can see and anticipate these things a lot more. And I think reinforcing that even a little bit further is the fact that the game as it stands right now is kill points. That's name of the game.
The objective is the battlefield.
The
Where's
objective, of the battlefield.
We're fighting over this. This is, apart from the tower, we're fighting over the battlefield. That's the objective. Who takes the field?
Kill the other guy, right?
Yeah.
And like kill points can get gamey too once you start really pushing it to its edge, like
100%.
with points denial and things like that. But you know, within a gaming meta, you find ways to counter someone who's trying to do points denial. You know that you have to have tools to go dig someone out.
Yeah.
And so anyway, there's just a lot of things that I think make the game great. And also, let's not forget, I don't know if you're a Total War guy, we also have all of these units and things that are happening actually fully animated in our minds.
Yeah.
Right. In a lot of ways, I think Dawn of War did that for 40K as well.
Yeah.
So we can see like the magic going off. We can see the dragon like swiping through and like knocking over a dozen of these poor state troopers. You know, like that stuff. Like the you know, theater of the mind, I think is really, really strong in Old World, and it feels like a very visceral game to me, and I just love it for that.
Yeah, totally agree. And so someone, the visual aspect of Old World, I still, after being out like 6 months, and I can't believe it's been 6 months already, I will look down at my blocks of shitty, terrible power level state troops that I've lovingly painted them all up, and I'll look down and I'll see the little flags, and I'll just step back and I'll be like, damn, I'm gonna look good losing today.
Yeah.
This isn't flying, this is falling with style. But someone left a comment on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Someone left a comment on one of my 40k tournament reports recently saying, damn, 40k truly is the game with the most beautiful models played on the most ugly terrain. Because L-shaped mirrors is MDF. Not always, but obviously tournament wise. Now, I want to end with 2 questions. I'm going to ask you two signature Val Heffelfinger hot takes. Number 1.
Okay.
What do you think is the strongest faction in our world right now?
Right now?
Right now.
I don't know. I struggle to say anything other than vampire counts.
Okay.
But yeah, let's just go vampire counts. That might be out of date by this point.
You don't have to justify it. It's just a hot take.
What else just did win the square-based online tournament? And seeing 5 Pillars of Fire just roll across a table is also an argument for a different faction. We'll see how long that lasts, but yeah.
Okay. Second question. What is your favorite faction in Old World? For any, it doesn't have to be for competitive reasons. All reasons taken into account, competitive fluff, whatever. Just your personal favorite one.
That's a toss-up. I have been.
One if you have to.
Oh well, okay. Well, so they're all my children. Probably. I do have the. You know, I am lucky enough to. Well, depending on how you cut it, I feel lucky that I've been able to like over the years amass some pretty like ridiculous collections of painted armies. When people are getting rid of stuff, like again, I was about 2 years ahead of the curve, so I was still able to grab just gorgeous things for nothing. Not nothing, something, but like for reasonable prices, less easy to do now. But I'd say like my biggest collection is probably Orcs and Goblins. Yeah. And I love Orcs and Goblins in fantasy because it's Orcs and Goblins. Yeah. Something that 40K for whatever reasons never leaned into is the Gretchen side of things. It's very much Orcs. Yeah. And then there are the Gretchens, and that's despite the fact that they had the Rebel Grots all like designed in Gorka Morka. Like I think to this day, the Rebel Grot leader is still one of the like most like awesome, iconic. The Red Gobbo is like one of the most iconic, awesome miniatures ever. I love them to bits, but they've never really leaned into sort of goblins. I guess Warzeg came, but not Warzeg. Is it?
Nick, that's on Old World.
No, the guy who gives the super grots in 40K now. He's got a beard and a big prod. Anyway, yeah. He's a run herd. Anyway, they brought him back, and that's that makes at least one unit of grots relevant. But I just love goblins. Goblins are cool as hell. Yeah. And then if you read Snickrot, which is one of the only pieces of Warhammer fiction I've managed to make it through cover to cover, you realize that they aren't just funny little goblins. They're actually nightmarish murderers, and just like. The evilest little bastards. They're the evilest little bastards, and it's like uncomfortable, actually, kind of like it's actually I'm a little uncomfortable being a big fan of goblins after reading Skarsnik,
Yeah.
because of how awful they actually are. But yeah, so I'm looking at a table filled with my orcs and goblins army because that's what I've been running lately. So it's got to be orcs and goblins. I think after that, probably Empire and Vampire Counts would be my next two, like things that really just fire up my imagination, and like make me like, again, just that visceral sense, like just excited to like have those bros out there. Or 100%. Those would be my top three personally.
Perfect. Well, Val, I think we'll wrap it up there if that's all right with you, buddy. And just want to say once again, thank you so much for having you on the channel, man, and really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. It was a really great conversation. I would like to tag on one little thing.
Of course. You have the floor.
I have seen a lot out there about people complaining about this game dying on the vine or whatever, it's dead. So first of all, that might be true where you live. Like, I mean, again, can't gaslight people who say that this game isn't working, because their lived experience might be no one's playing around me. And to those people out there, if you're really excited for Old World and you just feel like no one's playing it, I hate to be this person, but you got to be the change you want to see in the world. You got to give your local hobby store guy a hard time. Maybe consider, instead of having one 2,000 point army, maybe make 2,000 point armies. Try and be a bit evangelical about it. Like the thing that I did playing 8th edition, dead game, no new game on the horizon. People had some like remember berries about it, but like playing fantasy 2 years ago was like, why are you doing that? And there was in my neighborhood, no one playing it. Some people played 6th, no one played 8th.
Yeah.
So like I made it so that I had enough for my friends to come over and play who maybe liked fantasy in the past, and they would get a taste for it and they got into it. I ran a 40-person event at Mini Wargaming last year before Old World came out. 8th edition rules, like 40 people showed up, and that was because I had, like, again, not everyone has a podcast they can bully people with, but I have those things. But I'll tell you, it wasn't the podcast necessarily. It was individual bullying over a number of years to get people out to play, and that's like what I'm talking about. There is not actually bullying, but community building. So like, if you want people to play with, sometimes you've got to be the person who's the most interested and excited. And no matter what game it is, if there is someone who is like sort of taken the standard for it and is really excited about it, that's always contagious. Yeah. It's always infectious if you're just unabashedly thrilled to be able to play a game in whatever and however the people are willing to play it with you. So that's the number one thing I would say. Try and find a way to like build a community, because that's why 40K is what it is today, is because there were community organizers all over the world. When Games Workshop was doing their best to kill it in 6th and 7th edition, there were people all over the world who said, no, we're playing this game. It's ridiculous and it's broken and it's stupid and like literally broken, like did not work. A lot of people, like, not like that's overpowered. Like literally there's no way to make this work. Like it's broken. Like people who just refuse because they just loved it. And so if you do love it, try not to be bummed out about it. Try and share that love a little bit. That's the most positive way you can do it. And the next thing I would say is, for those people who are upset about the pace of release and all that kind of stuff, Games Workshop has been just in like really, Elon Musk, before he became a pariah, talked about when he was releasing the Model 3, which was one of their biggest cars. Is their biggest car. Talked about production hell. Essentially, making stuff is hard. Even if it's just injection molded plastic. They have a certain amount of capacity. They have the technology they have. It's not good enough, and they keep getting themselves into real big crunches meeting demand. And I think that's going to improve over time. If you go back and look right now at stocks and supplies, and if you were like, oh, everything sold out the day it came out, have a look now. Like, go look at Orcs and Goblins. Go look at Bretonnians. Go look at Tomb Kings. You're probably going to be able to get into the game now, if that's the way you want to do it. There's also like endless amount of third-party options that are, in some cases, I think, superior. So like, there's all the accessibility, ability to enter the game, very much there at this point. Don't be put off. The third thing I would say is, if as far as rules or accessing rules are concerned, I'd love you put it in the notes. It's called tow.whfb.app, and it's basically it's an online rules reference that's just rules. You can't make army lists with it, but it's the best way I think, to actually digest and read the rules because of the way it cross-links, makes things very accessible, makes the game at the table play way faster because you can find things real quick. So I would highly, highly recommend that for overcoming that. And I would say buckle up as well, because I think Games Workshop has realized that they really accidentally, I think they did this reluctantly. I think that's quite obvious in the way they approached the release. And they were concerned about how it's going to affect and cannibalize that off of AOS. They were clearly not wanting to necessarily do this, but because of that enthusiasm I was just referring to, the tail is wagging the dog. So like, I think GW is going to start accelerating the pace of their release. They're definitely going to be expanding the scope. They've already said that.
They've said it. The scope has changed.
I think if you're someone who loves one of the legacy armies, especially Dark Elves, go out right now. All of the Facebook online marketplaces, all of those are just filled with Dark Elves armies for sale.
Hoover them up. Hoover them up.
Go get them. Go get them. Because those rules, they may not be out next year. They may not be out. I would say probably somewhere in the realm of the year after. Those guys will be supported again. You can count. You can come back and give me shit if I'm wrong, because I won't be. So like, don't fear. Like, if your favorite thing is not officially supported, just go for it. And like, this game is like, will not be denied, because people are just genuinely enthusiastic. That's not something that you can. That's, as a company, that's not something you sleep on. If people are demanding stuff and are excited, are talking about this in the middle of the day for no apparent reason, you want to bottle that and encourage it. So I'm not standing for GW here. There's 1,000 ways to interact with this game. If you hate them for what they did to your game years ago, that's cool. Third party, secondary market, online rules, you can go for it that way. I buy all this stuff because I really love SDS. I love the studio that makes it.
Yeah.
So I buy the books and stuff to make sure that that's happening. But that's not something everyone has to do. You don't. No. This is a corporation that's not going out of business anytime soon, guys. No. What matters is that people engage, play, have a good time, meet new people. It's just a great thing, and I hope if this is something that you could enjoy, go out and enjoy it.
100% agree. 100% agree. Scope has changed. Always going to be here. And what I imagine is, like you said, for GW, was a reluctant release, has kind of got away from them a little bit. Oh, yeah. And I bet what they imagined would be a one and done, fine, have your book, you complaining bastards.
You assholes.
They're probably now, you assholes. They're probably scrabbling around already, desperately planning Old World version 2. So second edition is probably already in the pipeline, I would guess.
I would 100% agree with that. That statement. If it wasn't from word jump, I would say that if you go look at the original marketing when they were starting the hype for this game, it was this. Look, if you're a new player, don't do this. Don't do it. Okay, this is for a bunch of weirdos.
We've not been able to get rid of yet.
Yeah, this is for them. Just don't do this. Don't do this. This is going to be really complicated. The models are going to be tough to build. Just don't do it.
We're going to release them in metal. Who would have predicted metal models from GW in 2024? I did not have that on my bingo card.
So if you read the investor report that came out a little while ago, there's like one line about Old World, but I think it was the most telling, which is that the release of Old World, I'm paraphrasing, but the release of Old World was a great success and attracted hobbyists new and old to the game. Yeah. And so that contradiction, or at least that realization, the fact that this could be a channel for new hobbyists, for new people who aren't already engaged with the hobby or had been previously engaged with it, was apparently something that only recently occurred to them. And so if And getting net new players, getting a new person who's gonna trade all of their other social interaction, all of their free time for stuff that GW makes. When you can get one of those, you're gonna take one of those. So I think we'll see much better amount of support. I'm just happy if people are having a good time and I can get games in, and that's about it.
Perfect. Totally agree, man. Thank you for coming on, Val. Really appreciate it, dude.
Oh, it was an absolute blast. Thank you for having me. It was really kind of you to invite me, and stay square blessed.
Square based and dwarf pilled. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing, truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members, so thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Lord Pryor, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.